After months of speculation, it looks like we're finally getting an update on the pipeline that was rumored to be coming out of Alberta, and based on the headlines and what we're seeing, it sounds like a great thing. But once you get into the details, it looks like the only person who's going to be winning is Mark Carney. It will be at the expense of Canadians, it will be at the expense of Albertans. I'm already seeing a bunch of misinformation out there, especially in headlines, and we know that's all people read. It's important we address these issues now, especially because I do think this actually has a lot to do with Canada-US negotiations as well. There's a lot of sneakiness involved in this new understanding, and it seems like Liberals are already happy about it and they think they won on this. There's a lot to talk about in today's video, so let's get into it.
They have now signed this agreement this morning in...
So funny that I have to stop him 2 seconds in, but this is one of my main talking points for today. This is what has to be pointed out. It is not an agreement. It is an understanding that they will be working towards an agreement. And this is why we have to nip this in the bud now, because pressure was building. There was separatism pressure. There was pressure with the negotiations. There was all of this stuff. So the idea that the news is calling this an agreement is be working as a pressure release valve for people in Canada. They're saying, oh, we finally are getting the project. I'm even seeing people say, you know what? I was wrong. They're officially building the pipeline. No, they are not officially building the pipeline. There are so many hurdles ahead. This is not an agreement. There is some positives in the discussion, but I think there was a lot of red herrings in there. We will get into it. But that's one thing, literally 2 seconds into this video, I have to stop. We will not be calling it an agreement.
In Calgary, on this memo of understanding, basically laying the groundwork, setting the conditions, and sort of laying out the dual responsibilities shared by Alberta and the federal government towards getting this pipeline underway. Now, before we dive into sort of the details of the MOU, I want to just play a clip from you when Carney arrived in Calgary today and met for the first time with Danielle Smith just in advance of them signing that document. Here's what they had to say.
I'm pleased that we've reached an agreement to substantially work on removing and revising those laws. I think what it's going to do, especially with the removal of the emissions cap on Alberta, as well as the removal of the net zero power regs, I think it's going to...
So she keeps talking about the removal of the net zero power regulations, and she even posted it in her own tweet here. She says, oh, breaking, we've got this historic memorandum of understanding and no oil and gas production cap. First of all, that's not agreed to already. That isn't agreed to if all of the stipulations are made. Second of all, the no net zero power regulations, I don't know why they keep saying that, because we have the actual agreement right here. This is what they signed. And one of the first things says, Canada and Alberta remain committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So obviously we're going to need more details because it seems like net zero is going to be staying. There's so many more things here, especially with the amount of changes to the carbon pricing. There's a lot.
Unleash an incredible amount of investment and allow us to work together on important nation-building projects. So it's the first step, I think, of what will be a few more steps we have to take together, but I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister has heard our concerns and responded to them.
Thank you very much, Premier. And look, it's a great day for Alberta. It's a great day for Canada. And, at the heart of what is a multifaceted agreement, we have more work to do going forward, but a multifaceted agreement. In effect, it creates an energy transition, all aspects of energy, but really sets the stage for an industrial transformation.
And there you heard Premier Smith referring to some of the 9 bad laws, as she calls them, federal regulations and legislation that she says is curtailing development in the oil sector and effectively being an impediment to getting a private sector champion to come forward, put up.
What it's looking like is some of those bad laws are just getting passed on to being required to be put on by the provinces themselves instead of at the federal level, just becoming another roadblock. He's talking about this transformation and industrial transformation. We know Mark Carney believes in bureaucracy and the rule of law, and he thinks this project's going to get done. But what I truly do think is he believes in bureaucracy and the rule of law to stand in the way of this project. That's why he's happy to sign an understanding. He knows this won't get built. Even in this clip, they mentioned something very important later on. We've got other examples.
The $20 to $30 billion will require to build this pipeline. So in this memo of agreement, a lot of the details were leaked in advance, including some of those changes to the federal laws, including the tanker ban that prevents the use of oil tankers off BC's west coast.
It is not being changed until every single other thing is accomplished, in which case they will look at a somewhat removal for some of the tankers. So it's not even that they will blanket remove that, it's that they will look to exceptions to it. So it's on the agreement, it is on paper, but they've put so many things ahead of it to make it very difficult to have it removed.
Carney saying if this pipeline gets built, the government would adjust that law to allow tanker travel.
So now you have to have a pipeline built for them to think about adjusting the law. What's that going to do to private investors who have no guarantee that it will be removed until the pipeline's built?
Also going to eliminate something called the clean electricity regulations in Alberta. These are rules about the use of carbon sources to fire up your municipal electricity systems. This is something that Smith has complained about in the past, that they can't really make progress on some of these things unless they get those changes. So Carney's saying they're going to change that. He's also saying they are not going to implement the oil and gas emissions cap. This was something that Alberta called a productions cap, essentially a rule that would require emissions to be held at a certain level for the oil sands sector.
So that is the one thing that is a bit of a benefit, because it seems like there is a world where this could be introduced earlier than if the project just has to be completed, because this would also apply to the other pipeline production. That is something that actually could be good.
In exchange, Alberta is making some concessions too. They're going to invest in carbon capture and storage, something called the Pathways Alliance. And there's also some surprising things in here that Alberta is committing to, including incentivizing major investments in data center development.
Okay, so we're going to get into the data center stuff in a second. But what he just said with the pathways. So pathways already been proven that Mark Carney, all of his ties to all these private companies, all of that stuff will be the net beneficiary of the pathways as well, which we will get into a little bit later on. One of the other concessions they made is, if you guys remember, we talked about it in a video a few months ago, Danielle Smith had put a cap on the industrial carbon tax of $95. They have agreed to raise that to $130, and that's going to happen regardless of if the pipeline gets built. So that's another concession they made. So almost all of the Alberta concessions have to happen during development, during production, during these stages, but the Liberals only have to make their concession after most of it's completed. Now, here was another strange thing, that this pipeline deal was specifically centered around Alberta setting up a bunch of AI data centers, which again, there's so many weird red herrings going on in this.
So these are, computer data centers used largely for AI as well as offsite storage. And it's something that Carney has really talked about. In fact, in his budget, he talked about this, and he wants to turn Canada into an AI superpower. That's going to require these data centers. So this is not directly related to energy, but it is something that Alberta is committing to. And they're also saying Alberta is going to sort of pursue a strategy to build and operate nuclear power generation for all of Alberta. So the idea there, I guess, would be to get nuclear reactors in Alberta or somewhere that can be reached easily from Alberta to help them wean off coal-fired and natural gas-fired electricity.
Which I don't have a problem with. We're big nuclear guys on the channel. So if the idea is that they have to invest in getting nuclear set up, sure. But again, just another rule in this negotiation, which is going to make things really hard. What happens if the data centers are delayed? What happens if the nuclear is delayed? What's that going to mean for the pipeline? Like, again, there's just so many hurdles in place. And they do talk about one of the other big ones, which we'll be talking about.
But one of the things that's really kind of common throughout this document are references to inclusion of First Nations groups. This is a firm requirement from the federal government, is that First Nations have an ownership position in this new pipeline and also, a future economic stake. But First Nations are also the major impediment, because if this pipeline is going to be built eventually from northern Alberta, reaching the coast of British Columbia, where it would be, the bitumen oil will be loaded onto tankers, which of course, this would now be allowed under this memo of understanding because Carney would change that law, but they will still...
It's funny to see the mainstream media finally acknowledge that they are a major impediment.
face opposition from any of the coastal First Nations that are affected by this. And yesterday, a group representing those First Nations put out a statement saying this is never going to happen. This pipeline is never going to get built. They are going to oppose it, and they are going to insist on maintaining their constitutional rights to be consulted on this and have a say in the ultimate decision of whether the pipeline proceeds.
There you go. Mainstream media admitting that that is a major hurdle that's going to be a problem, especially since we just covered it yesterday. They said they're never going to allow a pipeline. There's so many bands, so many groups who have to get on board because it's all the way from Alberta to BC. And that's why, gov.exe put out this tweet here. Mark Carney says Alberta will get a pipeline if BC approves, First Nations approves, and it's paid for by the private sector. Why would the private sector want to take on all of that risk? This is why nothing gets built in Canada. Too many roadblocks, especially with data centers, nuclear, all of these other environmental regulations. There's so many things in the way. Let's listen to his statements here.
And he said, CBC, Prime Minister, are you willing to approve a pipeline even if British Columbia or affected First Nations don't agree? Would you compensate them instead?
Just to be clear, this agreement today between Alberta and the Government of Canada, it's the first step. It's an example of cooperative federalism. We're agreeing in partnership and in a spirit of trust. But what has to happen, several things have to happen before a pipeline is built. And one of those is the private sector.
Before a pipeline is built.
Proponent. Secondly, goes directly to your question, which is that there needs to be full partnership, including equity ownership, substantial economic benefits with First Nations in Alberta, First Nations in British Columbia, as well as agreement and substantial economic benefits for the people of British Columbia. So we look at this as the start of a process. We've created some of the necessary conditions for this to happen. But there's a lot more work to do, and very much in the spirit of partnership.
Once again, referencing the actual agreement here, the Indigenous, the First Nations, they are mentioned probably 20 times on this thing, and it's only 5 pages. Alberta and Canada recognize their obligations to consult with and, where appropriate, accommodate Indigenous peoples, and then go on with respecting treaty rights and giving them ownership. And again, like he just said there, it's going to be the Alberta natives, the BC natives, and then it's going to be the people of BC, and who gets co-ownership, and who benefits, and what does this mean? There's so many moving parts here, so many groups to get in the way of it on the West Coast, but Quebec themselves is also out here showing they're not here to support oil and gas.
So the fast one is being elected on promises that he's not abiding by. He's taking Canadian, Quebec's money and sending it to oil companies in the West. And if he succeeds in convincing BC, that's an additional failure because he cannot get the oil out through the West. And if he does succeed, he'll have to manage his caucus, manage the BC, manage environmentalists. So he has a real problem there. That's not the fast one. The fast one was being elected, saying he would do certain things and doing the opposite.
So now we've got West Coast opposition, we've got East Coast opposition, and some of the BC politicians right away are already out here reacting. Mark Carney and Danielle Smith's MOU is an abuse of power and a spit in the face of British Columbians. They will never ram a pipeline through BC without the consent of coastal First Nations and northern communities, and we'll make effing sure of it. She is the leader of a political party in British Columbia, but we'll be getting into the cartoonist in a second and how the Liberals are viewing this, and I will break down my theory as to why I do think this also has to do with Canada-US negotiations. We know pipelines have become one of the most politically charged projects. Even though Canada needs them, everybody wants to stand in the way of them. Now they've introduced so many cooks in the kitchen, so many decision makers, so many hurdles. This pipeline is essentially dead on arrival, unfortunately. So again, we will get into my theory of why this is such a big deal, that we cannot accept this as a good thing. We need to hold them to higher standards, because what happens is once people stop paying attention and the eyes aren't on it anymore, Juno News put this out, that one of Carney's fast-tracked projects stalls after failing to meet conditions. New Brunswick government confirmed that the Sisson Mine project has failed to meet a single one of the 40 conditions required for approval, and it would not be moving forward immediately. Despite Carney adding the mine to his second wave of nation-building projects, the New Brunswick government's environmental impact assessment approval will likely keep the project in limbo. So already a special interest project, one that had been discussed 4 years, it's not even a brand new project. This is something that's already been around, is getting shut down after being a Mark Carney special interest project. That just goes to show how low the expectations are that they actually plan on any of these projects becoming nation building projects. And a liberal cartoonist put this out here, and I do think this is what the liberals think is coming from this announcement. It's Mark Carney walking away with his smug face, and he says, now that's what I call parenting. And he's got Danielle Smith, obviously infantilized as a little kid, playing with her pipeline toy because she's totally distracted now that she was told, oh, here's a 1,000-piece pipeline, you know, a difficult project, a difficult puzzle, just to keep the child distracted. So that's what the liberals think of the West. This is what the liberals think of conservatives in Alberta. They think they're children who are easily distracted, and they have no intention of them actually completing a serious pipeline to get that project done, which is how we get to my theory. Now, getting into my theory and why I truly do think this is so important is I think this has been set up as a full red herring negotiation. I think they want Alberta totally distracted with a pipeline project that they have no intention of ever achieving. During them chasing this project, they are going to stop negotiations with the United States. Remember, Danielle Smith and the Trump administration had become friendly. They were talking about possible separation. They had talked about possible pipeline deals with the United States. Now we saw Saskatchewan companies are now working with American companies to get their shipping directly from the US because they know how hard it is to get business and projects done inside of Canada. So as a result, now all of the steam will be let out of the kettle. The pressure release valve will be hit. Albertans will take their foot off the gas and say, wow, we finally got the project, which is what has been my point this entire time and how I keep seeing clips. This is a good thing. Alberta got to win. Conservatives got to win. This is awesome for Canada. We are getting this project. The agreement has been signed. Now people will give up on the pressure of the separation and getting the deal done and removing the federal carbon tax and all of these things. But during this time, some of the best, most rosy predictions of this pipeline getting shovels in the ground is 4 years, assuming everything goes perfect. We know it's not going to go perfect. We've seen there is a ton of roadblocks in the way. While they're chasing increasing carbon taxes, while they're chasing and investing in pathways, making sure that these green companies and this carbon storage and all of that stuff's invested with, while they're investing in AI data centers, while they're getting distracted with nuclear, which I don't have a problem with, but you know, it is a distraction. They are not going to actually get a pipeline done. The Liberals will get all of the things that they wanted checked off during this make work project. And like I said, negotiations will halt between Alberta and the United States when it comes to any sort of separate trade deals. And I hope that I am wrong and this pipeline gets built and we get data centers and we get nuclear and all of that stuff. But unfortunately, history has shown us that is most likely not the case. So we need to keep the pressure on. Don't give up on all of the side projects, on all of the things that we need. A deal with the United States just because we got a fake pipeline. Also, don't let people call it an agreement. Don't let people say it's approved because those things are objectively not true. But if you made it this far in the video, you absolutely rock. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're trying to get these videos out in front of more people. We are trying to grow the channel. If you like what we talk about here, you can support the channel through the link down below. You can also do it directly through YouTube. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.